Welcome to part 2 of my commentary on Cecil B. DeMille's 1923 Ten Commandments. Here in this scene, Moses finally really gets to give it to the Pharaoh, and even finger pointing at him, so you know it has to be serious. This scene kind of almost reminds me of one from Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, where the bellboy tells off a cop at the desk of his hotel. Now, in this scene, the Pharaoh here looks like he would be saying to Moses, if his dialogue could be heard, that when you point a finger at me, there's 4 pointing back at you. Meanwhile, the next Bible quote we see is from Exodus 12:12. So we're roughly at the same place in the story as we were a few minutes ago. See, on the next Bible quote here, we've only omitted about 20 verses of text. So I think from here on, DeMille is following the biblical story fairly closely, or at least we would hope so. At about 1 minute and 32 seconds, we have a little scene that shows, makes reference to probably ancient Egyptian divination and the gods of Egypt, which we should expect to see this in a film like this, if it's trying to be accurate. Now, this Bible quote shown here at 2 minutes and 8 seconds is a really nice touch, because it allows DeMille to advance the story and keep this event going, because this actually is a pretty important part of the story, but he doesn't have to now have the actors show it. So he can save himself a couple of expensive scenes by adding this little quote in here. This is really nicely done. The crowd scene that follows this scene is one of many in this film where I think it's really well choreographed and really well shot. This shows like some real artistry and arranging on the part of the director, that he makes these crowd scenes look so good and so interesting. So now at 3:20 into this clip, we see the beginning of the actual Exodus. At almost exactly 4 minutes into this clip of the film, at the start of the Exodus, basically, we see, if you look really closely, for about a second on the screen, there's what looks like almost a Star of David on top of this one extra's walking staff, and if this is in there, that's an anachronism, because at this time in the Exodus is hundreds of years before their time of David and Solomon, at least hundreds, and that's when the Star of David first appeared, supposedly was in the time of Solomon. So showing this in there it's an anachronism. It's probably an honest mistake. Okay, at about 5:15, when it cuts to the idol, or the whatever is representing the Egyptian gods or something in this film, it doesn't look right to me. I think it should be like something like Anubis, which is a dog's head on a man's body, or Horus, I think, is a falcon's head on a man's body, or something like that. But I think whoever did made the props for this movie, they were a little lazy. They didn't find a real a copy of a real, or didn't make a copy of a real Egyptian idol like they should have made. That shouldn't be taken in any way to mean that I'm supporting the construction of any idols. I'm just talking about what it would take to make the film historically accurate. Now, on second thought, after this, after I've now watched this specific clip of this movie about 5 or 6 times, and I sort of thought that the idol's head on there that's shown on the man's body, it looks like a sort of Art Deco version of a scarab beetle. And I believe the Egyptians actually did worship the scarab beetle. So this thing, it's a little hard to place because of how they made it look. But in this sense, it could be the idol they've constructed here could actually be accurate. And if you look carefully in the scene at about 1:28, you can see Anubis is standing off. A statue of Anubis is standing off to the side. So on second thought, I think I'm going to give these prop men some credit and say that they actually did a fairly decent job. At about 5 minutes and 32 seconds here in this clip, just check out or pay attention to the pharaoh's funky golden shoes that he's wearing with the little curl on the toes and stuff. For some reason, these things look like leftovers from probably Thief of Baghdad was getting filmed next door, and the prop man was too. He stole the ones off of the other set, but they just don't. Somehow they don't look period correct to me. I don't think Egyptians actually wore golden shoes like that. They probably really wore sandals. But anyway, I think it's in this effort the costume director is just trying to make the pharaoh look like a pimp, I think. At about 5:40 or so or something, we see, Pharaoh's really pissed. He's even taken off his cape. Now, for some reason, I can't help but think that if this film gets remade in modern times, because Hollywood is always looking for the safe and easy way to make lots of money, so they just keep endlessly remaking old movies. But anyway, I think if this movie somehow gets remade in the current days, I think the Pharaoh will probably be played next time by a rapper, and he'll probably have a grill in his mouth and be holding a pimp cup in his hand. From around 8 minutes, we see some random shots of Israel, the Hebrews crossing the desert with all their children and their animals, and these scenes are really beautifully choreographed. I think this is an example of why this is such a good film. It shows a real artist's way of how you would communicate dialogue without speaking, without having the actors actually speak, because these scenes both serve to give us narration that advances the story and manages also to convey a lot of emotions all at once without the necessity or the need for dialogue. It's a very efficient way of doing this, because you can condense a lot of information into a very few quick scenes without the necessity of having sound or a sound recording on the film. And this is one of why I recommend this film, and I think it's such a classic and such a good piece of art. This film, Demille is such a great artist that he's not handicapped at all by the lack of soundtrack technology or at the time of his filming of this movie. The beauty of all these crowd scenes that's shown throughout the film tells us both that the talent of the extras that Demille used to make this film, and their acting ability, as well as the fact that one picture, if it's beautifully arranged and well planned and thought out, can often tell us as much of a whole story as many lines of dialogue. And I would even go so far as, in my praise of some of the artistry of this film, I would even go so far as to say that if I was a film student, I would be watching some of these scenes very, very closely to use as hints for what I might do in a future film of my own. It also makes me realize that to make this movie properly, you would need to use a lot of animals as extras. Anyway, going back to my previous comments about the endless remakes of certain films, really shows Hollywood's real lack of imagination, and as well, it also points out the fact that film has been around with us now for over 125 years. So there's an awful lot of old films to copy. The big difference to me between this film and, say, modern films of today, especially of the recent 21st century, is that in modern films there's way too much business and not enough art, whereas in this film there's much more balance between the two. It's extremely obvious to me when I watch today's films, the current films from Hollywood, that they're made solely for the purpose of making money. From about 11 minutes on, approximately, to about 13 minutes into the film, into this section of the clip, we're getting into the real meat of this part of the story now, the parting of the Red Sea. And previously, the scenes with the Egyptian army and are really well filmed. I think this, for how limited 1920s technology was, and probably dealing with all the dust in the desert and all the other problems that they may have had to find solutions for. These scenes are really, really well shot, and I think they're very entertaining and exciting to watch. These scenes from around 11 to 12, we'll say 12 and a half minutes, do a really good job of showing the Egyptian army chasing and pursuing the fleeing Hebrews through the desert, and give us a good sense of the coming doom for the Hebrews as the army follows behind them. At about 13 minutes, and maybe we'll say around 14 seconds, that sure looks like Dathan mouthing off to Moses here. And as I mentioned before, he isn't in this. He isn't supposed to be in this part of the story. And I thought he died under those wagon wheels in Egypt. But yeah, I guess unfortunately not. He's still with us. Now, Dathan isn't the only thing that's out of place in this scene. If we look on the right over the shoulder of Moses, again we see that same staff with the Star of David on top of it, which is an anachronism, which again, the Star of David doesn't exist at this time. So it's another little goof that's followed all the way through the desert. Anyway, on this next part, after right before the parting of the Red Sea, I think it uses good use of both the Bible verses that tell these parts of the story, and good use of the 1920s special effects with the double exposure and the fire to show the fire of God stopping the Egyptian chariots. Anyway, here, as again, because I have to section these movies into 15-minute clips, this is a really ugly cut because thanks to YouTube, I have to cut this right before the parting of the Red Sea. So I hope you'll stay tuned and watch the next piece when I deal with the rest of this. Will be in part 3, coming up in part 3.